My musical journey began before I was even born. I found out that the number one when I was born was Lionel Richie, Hello. I later found this out when I was at university, and I produced and directed a music video for the very same song. The first people I remember to be a fan of was Kylie and Jason. This was probably from my fascination with Neighbours at such a young age. As I grew older, at about 9 or 10, I bought my first single. This was Bjork, It's So So Quiet, and was bought on cassette from Woolworths. My first hi-fi I received for Christmas. I must have been about 11 or 12. I got a CD that year as well. It was Mud. It must have been a freebie when my mum and dad bought the hi-fi. Later in the day, though, I did receive a Christmas present from my nana. This was Now 26, my first compilation CD. This was on cassette tape also. After this, I did try to get Now 27, Now 28, Now 29 and so on. My love for radio began quite early. I used to record my own radio shows by pressing record and pause when listening to the UK Top 40 with Bruno Brooks. I used to record it, pretend to be the presenter, and then listen back to it. As I grew older, around the age of 12 or 13, I became a fan of boy bands. This was Take That, Boyzone and E17. Because of this, I then attended my first gig at the age of 13. This was to see Boyzone at the Newcastle Telewest Arena. I went with my friends to see this. During my mid-boy band craze, my friend's older sister introduced me to Alanis Morissette. This album was Jagged Little Pill, and it still remains one of my favourite albums of all time. I also had a personal CD player. I used this on holiday, and I had recently upgraded from a personal cassette player. These were ideal for being out and about, but again, they're a lot more bulky than the iPods that we get nowadays, and it was only CDs that you could use. By the age of 16, I went back to boy bands. Boyzone, I saw them twice again, and Five, also seen at the Telewest Arena. I also saw a few boy bands and cheesy pop at the TFM live roadshows. These were usually in the summer. As I started college, boy bands weren't the in thing anymore, and R&B came into play. I started to go out with my friends and go to the pubs around Darlington, and again R&B and cheesy pop were the main things that were played. At the age of 17, between my first and second year at college, I went to Faliraki with 2 girlfriends. The music here was R&B and garage. I think being a fan of garage lasted about 2 weeks whilst I was on holiday. However, R&B was still quite successful when I came back. However, by the age of 18, I became a real sucker for reality TV shows. Pop Idol had just begun. This was the first reality TV show for people to go on and sing. Will Young won this series. I became a huge fan of his and bought all of his albums shortly after. Shortly after winning, Will Young performed at the Queen's Jubilee concert. I was lucky enough to win tickets to this at Buckingham Palace. There was a massive variation of different music artists playing at the Queen's Jubilee concert. These varied from S Club 7 to Atomic Kitten to The Cause, all of which I'd heard of and I knew all their songs. There was also Paul McCartney, Tom Jones, Ozzy Osbourne, who I'd never heard of, Brian May and Queen, Rod Stewart, Elton John, Will Young, amongst many, many others. This really opened my eyes to the amount of music that had been in the UK over the past few decades. There was different songs had been played, and I'm ashamed to admit it, there was quite a few there that I hadn't even heard of, and definitely didn't know the words to. An example of this was Hey Jude. After the concert, I bought the DVD, and my love for live performances really started all over again. Thankfully, I'm now aware of all the songs that were played on that night. Because of my love for radio when I was so young, I decided to study TV and radio production at university. I was always a fan of radio, but since DAB, digital audio broadcasting, was introduced, there are loads more possible choices for me to listen to. There are so many different radio stations. I became a much more selective listener. There are so many specialised stations. These can vary from Capital Disney, Smash Hits, Fun Kids for the younger children, Kerrang Radio, Smooth, Gold. So many different stations for so many different audiences. DAB works on multiplexes and therefore can change quite rapidly. This is a downside. At 18 at university, one of my best friends was a presenter and producer for Galaxy Radio. I just so happened to win a competition to win a DAB for my car. At the time, these were, and still are, very expensive and really hard to come by. Thankfully, I have the same car and my DAB is still in there. I listen to it every day and listen to different radio stations that are not available on analogue radio. For Christmas when I was 20, I got a DAB for my room at university. Again, this is used every morning, every day. I listen to different stations for different reasons and when I'm in different moods. More recently, as technology has developed, I received my first MP3 player. This was called a QB, and it could only hold 100 songs. Being quite into technology, I then upgraded and bought myself an iPod Touch. The memory on this is obviously a lot bigger, but I also use it for internet. My consumption now and my music on there is both from my CD collection, but mainly downloads. I also listen to the radio on my mobile when I'm out shopping. My music experience and timeline has changed a lot over the past few years. As technology is fast developing and changing, who knows what will happen next.